During the funeral, the priest noticed something strange. Taking a closer look, he froze in place. Father Michael had been a priest for over 30 years, and he'd seen his fair share of funerals. Yet, as he stood at the pulpit looking down at the body of Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The church was filled with mourners, their heads bowed in sorrow, but Father Michael's eyes were fixed on the casket. Mrs. Thompson had been a beloved member of the community, known for her kindness and generosity. Her passing had been sudden, and the town was still reeling from the loss. As Father Michael began the eulogy, he noticed a slight movement from the corner of his eye. He paused, his heart skipping a beat, but when he looked again, everything seemed normal. He continued with the service, but the nagging feeling persisted. When it was time for the final blessing, Father Michael approached the casket. As he leaned in to sprinkle holy water, he saw it again, a faint twitch of Mrs. Thompson's finger. He froze, his mind racing. Could it be a trick of the light, or was something more sinister at play? Father Michael decided he couldn't ignore it. He signaled to the funeral director, Mr. Harris, who approached with a puzzled expression. "Is everything all right, Father?" he whispered. "I'm not sure," Father Michael replied, his voice trembling. "I think I saw her finger move." Mr. Harris's eyes widened, but he quickly composed himself. "Let's take a closer look," he said, motioning for the pallbearers to lift the casket lid. As the lid was opened, a collective gasp echoed through the church. Mrs. Thompson's eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Father Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he reached out to touch her hand. It was cold and lifeless, but the sight of her open eyes was enough to send a shiver down his spine. "We need to call the coroner," Mr. Harris said, his voice steady despite the shock. "This isn't right." The mourners were ushered out of the church, their whispers filling the air with a sense of unease. Father Michael stayed behind, his mind racing with questions. Had Mrs. Thompson been buried alive, or was there another explanation for what he'd seen? The coroner arrived within the hour, his face grim as he examined the body. "There's no sign of life," he said finally, shaking his head. "But the eyes, it's unusual. I'll need to conduct a full autopsy to determine what happened." Father Michael nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the mystery. As the coroner and his team took the body away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What if there was more to Mrs. Thompson's death than met the eye? Days turned into weeks, and the town buzzed with rumors about the strange events at the funeral. Father Michael tried to go about his duties, but the image of Mrs. Thompson's open eyes haunted him. He prayed for guidance, seeking solace in his faith, but the answers eluded him. Finally, the coroner's report arrived. It confirmed that Mrs. Thompson had indeed been dead at the time of the funeral, but there were traces of a rare toxin in her system. The toxin, the report explained, could cause muscle spasms and other strange symptoms even after death. Father Michael felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The mystery was solved, but it didn't bring Mrs. Thompson back. He gathered the community for a memorial service, sharing the findings and offering words of comfort. As he spoke, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. Mrs. Thompson was at rest, and the town could begin to heal. But Father Michael would never forget the day he saw the dead move, a reminder that even in death there are mysteries that defy explanation.